In this video, we're going to be going over for loops and while loops. Oftentimes we find ourselves working with lists that contain data we're interested in, but we don't want the list by itself. We want to access each item inside that list. So a convenient way to do this is to use a for loop. This is what a for loop looks like. So you go for item. Now I'm using this is just a temporary variable name that's going to take the value of each item in your list. And I'll say in shopping list. So I have this shopping list I've pre-built here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to ask it to print the item. And let's walk through the logic of what's going to happen here before we see the results. So first, the for loop, it's going to grab the first item in this shopping list. So that would be carrots. So item, the variable, is going to temporarily take the value of this string carrot. And then it will print that, so it'll print this string here. And since there's nothing left inside the loop, it'll then iterate to the next item. So the first time through it prints carrot, and then it's going to go through this again, and it's going to now have item take the value of potatoes, so it'll print potatoes. And then the third time through, it'll have item take the value of celery and print celery here. So what it's doing is, for each item in a list, it's iterating through that list and grabbing the items in sequence. So let's make it a little bit more complicated, and let's add another item to the list, maybe the integer 15. So we can run this, and we'll see it prints off 15, then carrot, then potatoes, then celery. Now, don't be confused by the fact that I named this item. I could name this anything. This is the variable name that's going to temporarily take these values as you go through the loop. So anything will now be used here, and this should run exactly the same because when it goes through, anything will be assigned the value 15 the first time through the loop, and will print that 15. The second time through the loop, anything will be assigned the value carrot, etc. So let's run it. Same results. So that's the most basic aspect of the for loop. And essentially all it is it's grabbing an item from what we call an iterable. So this doesn't have to be a list. It could be any type of iterable. And let's show one more example there. So here I'm going to do a string, maybe a name. And let's go with my name, Kai. So what I could do is I could say for item in name print item. And so let's think about what's going to happen here. So if I take name and I index it, let's go ahead and define name. I'm on the line, so I'll hit F9. Name indexed at 0 returns a K. And then indexed at 1, it returns an A. And at 2, it returns an A. So you can imagine name, when treated as an iterable, this item is going to be returning the letters in the name. So let's go ahead and run this. And we see it prints off the K. So what was at index 0? Then the A, then the A, then the I. So index 0, and then it iterates through the list. Index A, index B, index 0, index 1, index 2, index 3. Perfect. Okay. Now again, I could rename this temporary variable name anything I want. I could call it letter. And this would work just fine as long as I print letter, because here letter's taking the value of each item in this iterable. So we want to print off that item in the iterable. We'll print it off here. So letter is what has the value of that item, so we'll print off letter. Perfect. Okay. Now let's move on to something a little more complex. What I have here is some DFT data. So in this data, what we have is a concentration of element A, a conductivity associated with this system, and a status regarding the calculation, whether or not it diverged or converged onto a reasonable solution. So let's go ahead and make a for loop that can iterate through this data. So first, I want to keep track of the concentration. So I'm going to make a list that I can append to during the loop. I want to keep track of the conductivity, so I'll make another list that I can append to during the loop. Now let's go ahead and make our loop. So for, I'll call it datum. That's going to be the temporary variable name I'll go with. In DFT data, so that's this list right here. What do we want to do? Well, thinking about how this for loop is going to work, DFT data is a list, and inside of that list are other lists. So datum, as we iterate, is going to be taking the value of one of these lists. So you could kind of think of the iteration as being datum equals this first list on the first time through. Then the second time through, datum equals this next list. And we'd make our way down through each of the iterations in our for loop. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to ask if datum in the negative first position is equal to diverged. I'm not very interested in this calculation because it didn't converge to a real solution. So I'm going to print skipped divergent calculation, and then I'll continue. So what continue does is it says, so this is inside of the for loop, it says when I hit this continue statement, start your for loop and don't do the rest of the stuff below. So essentially go to the next item in the for loop, and instead of executing what's underneath. So once I hit a continue, I'm done, I move to the next item. Now if datum is not diverged, it's going to continue through the code. So what we'll do is we'll take concentration and we'll append datum 0, because that's where the concentration values are. And then similarly, we can take conductivity and append datum 1. So what's going to happen when we run this loop is we'll have two empty lists to start with. And the first time through the loop, the first time through our for loop, datum will take the value of the first item, or the item at index 0, in our iterable. So in our case, we have a list with lists inside of it, so datum takes the value of this first list. Then we're going to check if datum -1, so if the last item in datum is equal to diverged, we'll skip it. We'll print skip diverged calculation, so we're not going to append it. Instead, we're going to hit this continue statement and move on directly to the next item. From here, this next item, datum -1, is not equal to diverged, because this will be converged. And so then we don't hit this continue because we don't enter this statement. Instead, we append to our concentration datum 0, and we append to our concentration datum 1. So let's run it. So we have 3 where we skip divergent calculations. So that would be this one, and this one. And you'll notice the conductivity values are much, much different than what we see here. And if we look up here, our concentrations, the ones that were valid, have been kept track of. This empty list is now full of float values associated with the concentration, and the conductivity has had a similar treatment. The next thing we'll look at is a while loop. So while loops are particularly useful when you don't know when you're going to end. So when it comes to a list, we know the list has a fixed length, but let's say you're waiting for a user's input. How I might do something like this is, well, let's say we want to let the user write text and then say stop when they're done. So we'll have some full text that they can append to, and we'll say while true. So this loop is just going to always be true, so it's always going to run until we stop it. We'll say text equals input, and I'll show you how to stop it in just a second. We'll say input text here. So this input statement lets a user input text, and it'll be saved to a variable. Let's go ahead and run this line right now so you can see what I mean. So I'm going to run this with F9. It says input text here, so I'll click. I'll say hello. I hit enter and it finishes, but watch. This variable text now has the string hello saved to it. So what I typed in into the input is now saved here on text. So a user is going to type, and we'll say print input text, and we'll tell them what their text was, and then we'll say full text is equal to the full text, so what it used to be, plus the text that they input, plus we'll add a space in there. Now an easier way of writing this, since it's full text equals full text plus text, so we're trying to make it bigger, we can instead do a plus equals the text. So essentially we're saying full text equals full text plus this extra space in here. Now here's where we're going to add the option for the user to kill this while loop or break it. So if the user types stop, we're going to grab the lowercase of the text. So if we convert all of the text to lowercase and stop is in the text, we will break. So unlike continue, where you move to the next item, break completely kills the loop. So then finally, once the loop has been broken, what we can do is we can print the full text all the way up until the very end, since it'll have a space right here. So let's go ahead and run this. So we'll input text here. So let's start with hello. Input text here. Since I'm in the while loop, I got through, I put my input, it updated the full text, it saw that there wasn't the word stop inside of the text I typed in, so it's going to go right back to the top. So it runs this again. So I'll say, I am okay, please stop. Now it breaks. So since stop was in my word, it got into this if loop, and it broke the while loop, and it was able to print off the full text, which is, I am okay, or it was right here, hello, I am okay, please stop. Perfect. Let's stop there, and in the next video, we can cover list comprehension and dictionary comprehension. That should be a short one. And then we'll move on to looking at arrays.